Sarah Martinez stood at the back of the corporate training room, clutching a worn notebook against her chest. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of her colleagues who were already seated in neat rows. She could feel their eyes on her as she walked toward the only empty chair left, right in the front row, where everyone could see her secondhand blazer and scuffed shoes. At 28, Sarah had worked as a janitor at Morrison Industries for 6 years. Every night, she cleaned the offices where important decisions were made, where million-dollar deals were discussed, where careers were built. She knew every corner of the building, every executive's coffee preference from the empty cups they left behind, every late-night conversation she'd overheard while emptying trash bins. But to most people in this room, she was invisible. The training session was part of Morrison Industries' new Employee Development Initiative, a program that supposedly gave every worker, regardless of position, the chance to attend leadership workshops. Sarah had almost thrown away the email invitation, convinced it was sent to her by mistake. Who would want a janitor in a leadership program? But something inside her had clicked accept before she could change her mind. Maybe it was the memory of her mother's voice, telling her she was destined for something greater. Maybe it was the exhaustion of being overlooked for so long. Or maybe it was the spark of hope that refused to die, no matter how many times it had been crushed. "Good morning, everyone," announced the trainer, a polished woman in an expensive suit. "Welcome to our Leadership Excellence Workshop. I see we have some interesting participants today." Her eyes briefly met Sarah's before moving on, and Sarah caught the slight frown that crossed her face. The workshop began with introductions. One by one, the participants stood up and shared their roles. Marketing directors, sales managers, project leaders. Each introduction was met with nods of approval and murmurs of recognition. Sarah's palms grew sweaty as her turn approached. "I'm Sarah Martinez," she said quietly, standing up. "I work in facilities maintenance." The room fell silent. She could hear the air conditioning humming, someone's pen clicking nervously. A few people exchanged glances. The trainer's smile became strained. "Oh," the trainer said, checking her clipboard. "I think there might be some confusion. This workshop is designed for management track employees." The email said all employees were welcome, Sarah replied, her voice stronger now. "I'd like to participate." The trainer's discomfort was obvious, but she nodded curtly. "Of course. Please take your seat." As the morning progressed, Sarah absorbed every word, took detailed notes, and asked thoughtful questions. But she noticed how her contributions were either ignored or met with patronizing smiles. When she suggested an innovative solution to a case study problem, the trainer acknowledged it briefly before moving on to praise a similar idea from a marketing manager. During the break, Sarah overheard hushed conversations in the hallway. "What's the cleaning lady doing here?" someone whispered. "This is embarrassing. Morrison Industries has really lowered its standards. I heard she actually thinks she belongs in management." Can you imagine? Sarah retreated to the bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her dark eyes, inherited from her grandmother who had cleaned houses her whole life, stared back with determination. She touched the small cross necklace her mother had given her, the only valuable thing her family had ever owned. Growing up in East Los Angeles, Sarah had been the first in her family to graduate high school. She dreamed of college, but when her father was injured in a construction accident, she'd taken the first job she could find to help support her family. That job had been at Morrison Industries, and somehow 6 years had slipped by. But Sarah had never stopped learning. In the quiet hours of her night shift, she'd read business books left behind in offices. She'd taken online courses on her breaks. She'd watched and listened, absorbing how successful people spoke, how they solved problems, how they led teams. She knew she had ideas that could help the company, but no one had ever asked for her opinion. When she returned to the training room, the afternoon session was beginning. The trainer announced a group project. Teams would develop a presentation on improving company efficiency. Sarah raised her hand to volunteer, but was quickly dismissed. "Why don't you observe for now, Sarah? This might be a bit advanced for your background." Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but she nodded and took her notebook to a corner table. She watched as the teams formed naturally, excluding her without a second thought. Marketing people clustered with other marketing people. Sales managers found their peers. No one approached the janitor sitting alone. But Sarah didn't waste the opportunity. She opened her notebook and began writing down everything she observed. She noted how the teams struggled with communication, how they overlooked obvious solutions, how their privileged perspectives blinded them to practical realities. She had cleaned their offices for years. She knew which departments were inefficient, which processes created unnecessary waste, which systems frustrated employees at every level. As the teams presented their ideas, Sarah listened carefully. Their proposals were polished, but generic, the kind of solutions that looked good on PowerPoint, but would never work in the real world. They talked about synergies and optimization without understanding the daily challenges faced by the people who actually kept the company running. When the presentations ended, the trainer asked if anyone had feedback. Sarah hesitated, then slowly raised her hand. Yes, the trainer said, clearly reluctant. Sarah stood up, her notebook in hand. I noticed that none of the presentations addressed the disconnect between management decisions and frontline operations. For example, the new filing system implemented last year sounds efficient in theory, but it actually creates more work for support staff because she began speaking and something magical happened. Her nervousness disappeared, replaced by passion for the subject. She talked about inefficiencies she'd witnessed, about simple changes that could save thousands of dollars, about the untapped potential of employees who were never asked for input. Her words were clear, specific, and backed by years of observation. The room grew quiet, but this time it was different. People were listening, really listening. A few participants leaned forward, taking notes. The marketing director who had dismissed her earlier now looked intrigued. When Sarah finished, the room was silent for several seconds. Then, the trainer cleared her throat. That's interesting feedback, Sarah. Thank you. Her tone was condescending, as if she were speaking to a child who had performed a simple trick. But Sarah had seen the looks on the faces around her. Some showed surprise, others skepticism, but a few showed something she'd never seen directed at her before: respect. The day ended with networking time, an opportunity for participants to connect with colleagues from other departments. Sarah stood by the coffee table, watching clusters of animated conversations form around her. No one approached her. She might as well have been invisible again. She was gathering her things to leave when a voice behind her said, "Excuse me, are you Sarah Martinez?" Sarah turned to see a young man in an expensive suit, someone she didn't recognize from the training session. He was tall, well-groomed, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being heard. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "I'm David Chun, assistant to the CEO. I was reviewing the workshop evaluations when I saw your name listed as a facilities maintenance worker. I have to admit, I was curious about what you were doing here." Sarah's heart sank. Here, it was the moment she would be asked to leave, told she didn't belong, sent back to her mops and vacuum cleaners. "I received an email invitation like everyone else," she said quietly. "I'm not questioning your right to be here," David said quickly. "Actually, I wanted to ask you about something. I've heard rumors about innovative ideas coming from this session, and when I looked into it, your name kept coming up." Sarah blinked in surprise. "My name. Several people mentioned your feedback during the presentations. Apparently, you had some insights about operational efficiency that caught attention." David paused. "Would you be willing to elaborate on those ideas?" For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak. In 6 years of working at Morrison Industries, this was the first time anyone in management had asked for her opinion about anything other than cleaning schedules. Yes," she managed. I'd be happy to share what I've observed." David smiled. "Excellent. Why don't we step in a conference room, B? It's quieter there." As they walked down the hallway, Sarah's mind raced. This felt surreal, walking beside someone from the executive floor, being treated as if her thoughts mattered. She caught sight of herself in a window reflection and straightened her shoulders. Conference Room B was one of the smaller meeting rooms, with a polished table and ergonomic chairs that probably cost more than Sarah made in a month. David gestured for her to sit across from him. So, he began pulling out a tablet. "Tell me about these efficiency improvements you mentioned." Sarah took a deep breath and opened her notebook. The pages were filled with observations, sketches, and ideas she'd accumulated over years of night shifts. She had documented everything: which departments left their computers running all night, wasting energy; which filing systems caused employees to spend hours searching for documents; which meeting room setups created communication barriers. "It started with the energy costs," she began. "I noticed patterns in how different floors used electricity. The marketing department on the 4th floor leaves their equipment running 24/7, but the accounting department on the 2nd floor is very careful about shutting down. I calculated that we could save about $30,000 annually just by implementing automated shutdown systems on the 4th floor." David's eyebrows rose. You calculated this yourself? Yes. I took an online course in energy management last year. Sarah flipped through her notebook. But that's just one example. The real inefficiency is in communication between departments. She began explaining her observations about interdepartmental workflows, using specific examples from her nightly rounds. She had watched the accounting team struggle with reports that marketing submitted incorrectly. She had seen the IT department work overtime to fix problems that could have been prevented with better initial protocols. She had witnessed the facilities team waste hours on maintenance requests that were poorly communicated. Every night, I see the aftermath of these inefficiencies, Sarah said, her confidence growing. People staying late because processes don't work smoothly. Mistakes that could be avoided. Resources being wasted because departments don't understand how their actions affect others. David was taking notes rapidly on his tablet. Have you documented specific recommendations for addressing these issues? Sarah nodded and flipped to a section in her notebook. I've developed a proposal for improving interdepartmental communication. It's based on something I learned in a project management course I took online. The basic idea is creating liaison roles, people who understand how different departments function and can facilitate better coordination. She outlined her plan, explaining how it could reduce redundancy, improve response times, and increase overall productivity. David listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed he understood the complexity of what she was proposing. This is remarkable, David said when she finished. You've essentially conducted a comprehensive operational analysis of the company from a perspective none of our consultants have ever considered. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. I just pay attention to things. When you clean offices every night, you see how the company really works, not just how it's supposed to work on paper. Indeed, David closed his tablet and leaned back in his chair. Sarah, I have to ask, what are your career aspirations? I mean, beyond your current role? The question caught Sarah off guard. No one had ever asked her about her aspirations before. For a moment, she felt the familiar urge to downplay her dreams, to give the safe answer that wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. Instead, she found herself being honest. I want to contribute more than I currently can. I want to use my mind, not just my hands. I have ideas about how to make this company better, and I'd like the chance to implement them. David nodded slowly. What kind of education do you have? High school diploma. But I've been taking online courses for years. Business administration, project management, financial analysis, organizational psychology. I know it's not the same as a college degree, but it shows initiative and self-motivation, David finished. That's actually quite impressive. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Sarah could hardly believe this conversation was happening. 6 hours ago, she had been the invisible janitor that no one wanted in their training session. Now she was discussing business strategy with someone from the executive floor. Sarah, David said finally, I'd like to share your ideas with some people in upper management. Would you be comfortable with that? Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Really? What you've described could have significant impact on our operations. The CEO has been looking for fresh perspectives on efficiency improvements, and your insights are exactly the kind of outside-the-box thinking we need. Yes, absolutely. I'd be honored. David smiled. Excellent. I'll be in touch within the next few days to set up some meetings. In the meantime, I'd recommend documenting your ideas more formally, perhaps in a written proposal format. I can do that, Sarah said, her mind already racing with possibilities. As they stood to leave the conference room, David paused. Sarah, can I ask you something personal? Of course. What made you attend the training session today? It would have been easier to skip it. Sarah thought about the question. I guess I've been invisible for so long that I forgot I had a voice. Today, I decided to remember. David smiled. I'm glad you did. Sometimes the most valuable perspectives come from the most unexpected places. As Sarah walked back to her car in the parking garage, she felt like she was floating. The concrete walls and fluorescent lighting that usually depressed her seemed brighter somehow. For the first time in years, she felt hope, real, tangible hope that her life might be about to change. She thought about calling her mother to share the news, then decided to wait. She had learned not to get her hopes up too high. But as she drove through the evening traffic toward her small apartment, Sarah allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to contribute her ideas, to be valued for her mind rather than dismissed for her job title. The night shift awaited her, the familiar routine of empty offices and quiet hallways. But tonight, as she cleaned those same offices, she would see them differently. They weren't just spaces to be maintained. They were the beating heart of a company that might finally be ready to listen to what she had to say. Little did she know that her notebook full of observations and ideas was about to set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything Morrison Industries thought it knew about leadership, potential, and the value of every human being who walked through their doors. 3 days passed before Sarah heard from David Chen again. During those 3 days, she threw herself into documenting her ideas with an intensity that surprised even her. She spent her lunch breaks at the public library, researching best practices in organizational efficiency. Her nights at Morrison Industries took on new meaning as she observed workflows with fresh eyes, taking detailed notes about everything she witnessed. Sarah had always been a keen observer, but now she was observing with purpose. She timed how long it took different departments to respond to maintenance requests. She noted which teams collaborated effectively and which seemed to work in isolation. She documented the ripple effects of small inefficiencies, how a poorly designed filing system in accounting created delays that affected marketing deadlines, which in turn impacted sales presentations. On Thursday morning, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Sarah almost didn't answer, assuming it was a telemarketer. "Hello, Sarah. This is David Chun from Morrison Industries. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Sarah's heart jumped. She was in the employee break room, about to start her shift, surrounded by other night shift workers eating dinner from brown paper bags. "Yes, of course. Let me just—" She walked quickly toward the exit, stepping into the empty hallway. "Okay, I can talk now." "Great. I wanted to update you on some developments. I shared your efficiency proposals with several department heads, and there's been quite a bit of interest. In fact, I'd like to schedule a meeting for you to present your ideas directly to some key stakeholders." Sarah leaned against the wall for support. "A presentation? To department heads? I know it might seem daunting, but your insights are exactly what we need. The company has been struggling with efficiency issues for months, and our expensive consulting firm hasn't provided solutions as practical as what you've outlined. I don't know if I'm qualified to present to executives," Sarah said, her confidence wavering. "Sarah," David's voice was firm but kind, "you've been studying this company's operations for 6 years from a unique vantage point. You understand workflows that most managers have never even seen. You're more qualified than you realize." Sarah took a deep breath. "When would this meeting be?" "Next Tuesday at 10 a.m. It will be about an hour in conference room A on the executive floor. I can arrange for you to have the morning off from your regular duties." The executive floor. Sarah had cleaned offices there countless times, but she had never attended a meeting there. The idea terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "I'll do it," she said. "Excellent. I'll email you the details and some background information on the attendees." "Sarah?" "Yes. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in that room. Your ideas have merit, regardless of your job title." After hanging up, Sarah stood in the hallway for several minutes, processing what had just happened. Other night shift workers passed by, heading to their assignments, nodding brief acknowledgments. They had no idea that their colleague had just been invited to present to the executive team. Sarah spent the weekend preparing obsessively. She borrowed presentation books from the library, watched YouTube videos about public speaking, and practiced her delivery in front of her bathroom mirror. She typed up her handwritten notes, creating charts and graphs on her ancient laptop to illustrate her points. Her small apartment became a war room of preparation. Papers covered every surface, showing workflow diagrams, cost-benefit analyses, and implementation timelines. Her mother called on Sunday, concerned about Sarah's distracted responses during their weekly conversation. "Mija, you sound different. What's happening?" Sarah hesitated. She hadn't told anyone about the training session or the upcoming presentation. Part of her was protecting herself from disappointment, but another part was protecting her family from false hope. "I'm working on a project for the company," she said carefully. "That's good, Mija. You're too smart to be cleaning floors forever." That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind cycling through everything that could go wrong. What if she froze up during the presentation? What if her ideas weren't as good as she thought? What if this was all some elaborate mistake? And she would be humiliated in front of the most powerful people at Morrison Industries. But mixed with the anxiety was something else, excitement. For the first time in years, she felt like she was moving towards something instead of just maintaining the status quo. Even if the presentation went badly, she would know she had tried. Monday night's shift dragged endlessly. Sarah found herself cleaning the executive floor offices with new intensity, imagining herself sitting at the conference table where she usually just emptied wastebaskets. She paused at each office door, thinking about the people who worked there and how they might react to her presentation. The night security guard, Miguel, noticed her distraction. "You okay tonight, Sarah? You seem nervous about something." Miguel was one of the few people at Morrison Industries who had always treated Sarah with genuine respect. He was older, a grandfather who worked nights to supplement his social security, and he had often shared encouraging words during their brief interactions. "I have a big meeting tomorrow," Sarah said, realizing she needed to tell someone. "A meeting?" During the day, Sarah nodded, then found herself explaining the entire situation. The training session, David Chun, the invitation to present. Miguel listened without interruption, his weathered face showing increasing amazement. "Sarah," he said when she finished, "this is incredible. You know what this means? That I'm about to embarrass myself in front of important people?" Miguel shook his head firmly. "This means someone finally sees what I've always seen, that you're wasted cleaning floors. You have a mind, Sarah. You see things. I've watched you for years, and you understand this place better than the people who run it." His words meant more to Sarah than he could know. Miguel had been a supervisor at a manufacturing plant before retirement. His opinion carried weight. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Sarah's nervous energy. She had carefully selected her best outfit, a navy blue dress she had bought for her high school graduation and had worn only to church and job interviews since then. She paired it with a blazer from Goodwill and her one pair of good shoes. Standing in front of her mirror, Sarah barely recognized herself. The woman looking back appeared professional, confident, someone who belonged in a boardroom. But her hands were shaking as she applied makeup and tried to tame her hair into a professional style. She arrived at Morrison Industries an hour early, parking in the visitor section since she wasn't supposed to be working. The lobby felt different during business hours, bustling with activity, filled with people in expensive suits carrying important documents. Sarah had only seen this environment a few times, usually when she occasionally had to come in during the day for training or administrative tasks. At 9:45 a.m., she took the elevator to the executive floor. The ride felt endless, her stomach churning with each passing floor. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world of polished marble, contemporary art, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. David Chun was waiting for her, looking professional but approachable in a charcoal suit. His smile was reassuring as he approached. "Sarah, you look great. Ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Good. Let me give you a quick overview of who'll be in the room." David guided her toward conference room A as he spoke. James Morrison, the CEO's son and VP of Operations. Linda Walsh, Director of Human Resources. Robert Kim, Chief Financial Officer. And Dr. Elizabeth Harper, our Head of Organizational Development. Each name hit Sarah like a weight. These were people whose offices she cleaned, whose coffee cups she emptied, whose late-night phone calls she had overheard. They were the decision-makers, the power brokers, the people who shaped the company's direction. "They're all interested in what you have to say," David continued. "I briefed them on your background and gave them preliminary summaries of your proposals. They understand you're approaching this from a unique perspective." They paused outside conference room A. Through the glass walls, Sarah could see 5 people already seated around an enormous mahogany table. Her mouth went dry. "David," she said quietly, "what if they ask questions I can't answer? Then you say you don't know and offer to research it." "Sarah, these are smart people, but they're also practical. They care about results, not perfect presentations. Your ideas have merit. Trust that." Sarah nodded, took a deep breath, and followed David into the room. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Sarah Martinez," David announced. The 5 executives looked up from their papers, and Sarah felt their appraising gazes. She recognized each face from her nightly rounds, but seeing them in their natural environment was different, more intimidating. James Morrison, a man in his 40s with his father's prominent jaw and expensive haircut, stood first. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Sarah sat in the chair David indicated, placing her laptop bag carefully beside her. She had printed copies of her presentation, bound with clips she had bought specially for this occasion. Linda Walsh, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, leaned forward slightly. We've heard impressive things about your observations regarding operational efficiency. We're excited to learn more. Thank you, Sarah managed, her voice small in the large room. Robert Kim, the CFO, was already flipping through the preliminary summary David had provided. I'm particularly interested in your cost savings projections. David mentioned some significant potential savings in energy management alone. Dr. Harper, a tall woman with an authoritative presence, nodded agreement. We've been working with external consultants for months without achieving breakthrough insights. Sometimes an internal perspective is exactly what's needed. Sarah felt a flicker of encouragement. They seemed genuinely interested, not dismissive. Should we begin? James Morrison asked. Sarah opened her laptop with slightly trembling hands. Of course. Thank you all for taking the time to hear these ideas. She began with the energy efficiency proposal, using the projections she had refined over the weekend. As she spoke, explaining her methodology and showing her calculations, something remarkable happened. Her nervousness began to fade, replaced by passionate engagement with her subject matter. The data shows consistent patterns across all floors, she explained, clicking to a chart she had created. Departments with younger employee demographics tend to leave equipment running overnight, while departments with more experienced staff are more conscious of energy use. But the biggest factor is simply awareness. Most people don't realize the cumulative impact of their individual choices. Robert Kim interrupted. You gathered this data yourself? Yes, over the past 18 months. I started tracking it after taking an online course in energy management. The executives exchanged glances. Sarah couldn't read their expressions, but they seemed impressed. She continued with her interdepartmental communication proposal, outlining specific inefficiencies she had observed and her recommendations for improvement. This was where her unique perspective became most valuable. She could describe exact scenarios where poor communication had created problems. For example, Sarah said, last month I observed the marketing team working until midnight to revise a presentation because they didn't receive updated specifications from product development until 4 p.m. But I had seen the product development team discussing those changes 3 days earlier. The information existed, it just didn't flow to the right people at the right time. Dr. Harper was taking detailed notes. You're describing a systemic communication breakdown that our organizational assessment missed entirely. It's not that the systems don't exist, Sarah explained. It's that they're not being used effectively. People create workarounds that seem efficient individually, but create inefficiencies company-wide. For the next 45 minutes, Sarah presented her proposals with growing confidence. She discussed workflow optimization, resource allocation, and even employee morale factors she had observed. The executives asked thoughtful questions, and Sarah found herself engaging in substantive business discussions that challenged her knowledge and excited her intellect. When she finished, the room was quiet for several seconds. James Morrison was the first to speak. Ms. Martinez, this is exceptional work. The level of detail and practical insight is exactly what we've been seeking. I have to ask, Linda Walsh said, how long did it take you to develop these proposals? The formal documentation took about a week, but I've been observing these patterns for years. I just never had anyone to share them with before. Robert Kim leaned back in his chair. The financial projections alone justify implementing several of these recommendations immediately. But I'm curious about your background. David mentioned you've been taking business courses? Sarah felt a familiar flutter of insecurity. Online courses, yes. I know it's not the same as a formal education, but I wanted to understand business principles better. Self-directed learning shows initiative, Dr. Harper said. Some of the best business minds I know are autodidacts. What we need to discuss, James Morrison said, is implementation. These ideas require someone who understands both the theoretical framework and the practical realities. Sarah, would you be interested in leading the implementation of these proposals? Sarah's mind went blank. Leading implementation? That sounded like a management role. What would that involve exactly? We need to create a new position, Linda Walsh explained. Something like Operational Efficiency Coordinator. You'd work with different departments to implement your recommendations, track results, and continue identifying improvement opportunities. Sarah's heart was beating so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. That sounds like a promotion. James Morrison smiled. It would be a significant promotion, yes, with appropriate compensation and support for any additional training you might need. Sarah looked around the table at faces that showed respect, interest, and something that looked like admiration. 3 weeks ago, these people hadn't known she existed beyond emptying their trash. Now they were offering her a leadership role. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say yes," Dr. Harper said with a smile. "We'll work out the details over the next week. But, Sarah, this company needs people who see what others miss. You've demonstrated that ability beautifully." "Yes," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "Yes, I would be honored to accept that opportunity." As the meeting concluded and hands were shaken, Sarah felt like she was living in a dream. David walked her back to the elevator, both of them grinning. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Terrified and exhilarated," Sarah replied honestly. "That's exactly how you should feel when you're about to embark on something important." As the elevator descended, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the polished steel doors. The woman looking back at her looked different than the one who had arrived that morning. More confident, more purposeful, more alive. She thought about Miguel, about her mother, about all the nights she had walked these halls invisible and unheard. Tomorrow, she would walk them as Sarah Martinez, Operational Efficiency Coordinator, a title that reflected not just what she did, but who she had always been inside. The journey from invisible to indispensable had taken 6 years and one moment of courage. As she stepped out of the building into the afternoon sun, Sarah realized her story was just beginning. Sarah's first day as Operational Efficiency Coordinator began at 8 a.m. sharp in her new office, a small but professional space on the 3rd floor with a window overlooking the parking lot. The transition from night shift janitor to day shift coordinator felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's life. Linda Walsh from Human Resources had spent the previous week helping Sarah navigate the administrative details of her promotion. The salary increase was substantial, more than double her previous income, and came with benefits she had never imagined having. Health insurance, retirement contributions, paid vacation time, and a budget for professional development. "Remember," Linda had said during their orientation meeting, "you're not just implementing your own proposals. Part of your role is to continue identifying opportunities for improvement throughout the organization. Think of yourself as our internal consultant." Now, sitting behind her own desk with her nameplate, reading Sarah Martinez, Operational Efficiency Coordinator, she felt the weight of responsibility and opportunity in equal measure. Her laptop was newer than any computer she had ever owned. Her business cards were being printed. She had access to systems and data that had been completely off limits during her custodial years. But the transition wasn't without challenges. News of Sarah's promotion had spread quickly through Morrison Industries, generating reactions ranging from amazement to skepticism to outright resentment. At 9 a.m., Sarah attended her first departmental meeting as a coordinator rather than invisible support staff. The weekly operations meeting included mid-level managers from every major department, people she had observed from a distance for years. When she entered the conference room, conversations stopped. 20 faces turned toward her with expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Sarah had anticipated this moment, but experiencing it was different than imagining it. "Everyone," James Morrison announced, "I'd like to formally introduce Sarah Martinez, our new Operational Efficiency Coordinator. Sarah will be working with each of your departments to implement some significant process improvements." A man Sarah recognized as Carl Henderson, the marketing manager who had dismissed her during the leadership workshop, spoke first. "This is the janitor from the training session, right?" "Sarah is a valued employee who has demonstrated exceptional analytical abilities," James replied firmly. "Her insights into our operations have already identified potential savings of over $250,000 annually." Sarah watched the faces around the table process this information. Some looked intrigued, others skeptical. A few seemed genuinely hostile to the idea that someone from the custodial staff could suddenly be their peer or potentially their superior in efficiency matters. Rebecca Torres, the IT manager, leaned forward. "What's your technical background, Sarah? Some of the efficiency issues in our department are pretty complex." It was a fair question, but Sarah detected an undertone of challenge. "I don't have formal technical training," she admitted, "but I've observed IT operations extensively during my previous role. I've also completed online coursework in systems analysis and process optimization." "Online coursework," Carl muttered, just loud enough for others to hear. Sarah felt her face flush, but James Morrison's voice cut through the tension. "I want to be clear about something. Sarah's promotion is based on demonstrable results, not credentials. She identified operational inefficiencies that our high-priced consultants missed entirely. I expect everyone to give her the same professional respect you'd show any other coordinator. The meeting continued with department updates, and Sarah took careful notes on every presentation. She was gathering intelligence, looking for patterns and inefficiencies, but also trying to understand the personalities and politics she would need to navigate in her new role. After the meeting, several people approached her with varying degrees of welcome. Dr. Harper from Organizational Development was enthusiastic. "Sarah, I'm excited to collaborate with you. Your perspective could revolutionize how we approach process improvement." But others were less welcoming. As Sarah walked back to her office, she overheard fragments of conversation from behind her, completely unqualified for this position. What message does this send about career advancement? Probably won't last 6 months. Sarah had expected resistance, but hearing it still stung. She closed her office door and sat quietly for several minutes, reminding herself why she was here. She had earned this opportunity through observation, analysis, and genuine insight into how the company functioned. She belonged here, regardless of how she had arrived. Her first major challenge came that afternoon when she met with the accounting department to discuss implementing her interdepartmental communication improvements. The accounting manager, Patricia Hendricks, was a woman in her 50s who had worked her way up from bookkeeper to department head over 20 years. "I'll be honest, Sarah," Patricia said as they sat in her office. "I'm skeptical about this whole thing. We've been doing things a certain way for decades, and our department runs efficiently." Sarah had prepared for this conversation. She opened her laptop and pulled up specific examples she had documented. "I understand your concerns, Patricia. Your department does run well individually. But I've observed some communication gaps between accounting and other departments that create inefficiencies company-wide. For example, last month, the marketing team had to delay a product launch presentation because they were waiting for updated cost projections that accounting had completed 3 days earlier." Patricia frowned. "We sent those projections to the project manager as soon as they were ready." "You did," Sarah agreed, "but the project manager was out sick that day, and the backup contact information wasn't current. The projections sat in an inbox while the marketing team worked with outdated numbers." Sarah showed Patricia her documentation of the incident, including the timeline and the cascading effects on multiple departments. Patricia's expression shifted from skeptical to interested. "You've documented all of this?" "I've been documenting communication breakdowns for over a year. This isn't about blame. It's about identifying systemic issues that hurt everyone." For the next hour, Sarah walked Patricia through several similar examples, always focusing on systems and processes rather than individual mistakes. By the end of the meeting, Patricia was taking notes and asking questions about implementation strategies. "You know what?" Patricia said as they concluded. "You're right about these communication gaps. I never realized how our internal processes affected other departments." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of collaboration she had hoped for, turning skepticism into partnership through demonstrated value. Word of Sarah's successful meeting with accounting spread quickly. By the end of her first week, she had similar productive conversations with facilities management, human resources, and the legal department. Each meeting built her credibility and refined her understanding of interdepartmental dynamics. But not every interaction was positive. Her meeting with Carl Henderson's marketing team was particularly challenging. "I still don't understand why we need an efficiency coordinator," Carl said during their scheduled department review. "Marketing is about creativity and relationship building. You can't optimize inspiration." Sarah had anticipated this objection. "I'm not trying to optimize creativity, Carl. I'm looking at the operational side of marketing. How projects move through your department, how information flows between team members, how resources are allocated." She presented data showing how marketing's current project management system created bottlenecks that forced team members to work overtime unnecessarily. She outlined specific changes that could reduce stress and increase productivity without affecting creative output. "These suggestions assume that efficiency equals effectiveness," Carl argued. "Sometimes the best ideas come from working under pressure, from pushing deadlines." Sarah had cleaned Carl's office many times during crisis periods. She had seen the stress, the frustrated late-night phone calls, the papers scattered across every surface. She had also seen the innovative campaigns that emerged from well-organized collaborative periods. I've observed your team during both high-pressure and well-organized project phases, she said carefully. Your most successful campaigns, the Morrison Tech launch, the sustainability initiative, the partnership announcement, all came from periods when the team had clear processes and effective communication. Carl looked surprised. You've been tracking our campaign success rates? Not tracking specifically, but observing patterns. I've been in your offices during every project phase for 6 years. I've seen what works and what doesn't from a workflow perspective. The room fell silent. Sarah realized she had just revealed the extent of her observational knowledge in a way that made some people uncomfortable. She had been the invisible witness to their professional lives, and now she was using that knowledge to suggest improvements. That's actually pretty insightful, admitted Jennifer Kim, one of Carl's senior marketers. We did have better collaboration during the sustainability campaign. I remember that period feeling less chaotic. Sarah spent the remainder of the meeting focusing on specific, actionable improvements rather than systemic observations. By the end, even Carl seemed grudgingly interested in piloting some of her suggestions. As Sarah's second week progressed, she began to see the fruits of her labor. The accounting department implemented her communication protocol and immediately resolved a backlog of interdepartmental requests. Facilities management adopted her preventive maintenance scheduling system, reducing emergency repairs by 30% in just 10 days. Most importantly, other employees began approaching her proactively with inefficiency concerns. Maria Rodriguez from customer service stopped by Sarah's office with a detailed explanation of how billing inquiries got trapped in departmental loops. Tom Washington from sales described communication delays that cost the company client meetings. People are starting to see you as someone who actually listens, Davidson observed during one of their weekly check-ins. That's rare in a large organization. But Sarah's biggest test came at the end of her second week, when James Morrison asked her to present a preliminary progress report to the executive team. I want to hear about early wins and any resistance you're encountering, he explained. The board is very interested in this initiative. Sarah prepared meticulously for the presentation, documenting every implemented change, every measured improvement, every collaborative success. But she also prepared to address the resistance honestly. On Friday afternoon, she found herself back in conference room, facing the same executives who had hired her 2 weeks earlier. This time, she felt more confident, but also more aware of the stakes. In 14 days, she began, we've implemented efficiency improvements in 4 departments with measurable results. Accounting has reduced interdepartmental response time by an average of 2.3 days. Facilities has decreased emergency repair costs by 32%. Human Resources has streamlined their onboarding process, saving an estimated 6 hours per new employee. She presented charts showing cost savings, productivity improvements, and employee satisfaction increases in affected departments. However, Sarah continued, I want to be transparent about challenges. Some departments and individuals are resistant to change, particularly when it comes from someone they perceive as lacking traditional qualifications. Robert Kim leaned forward. Specific examples? Some managers question whether process improvements suggested by someone without a business degree can be valid. Others seem to resent the idea that a former custodial worker now has input into their operations. Dr. Harper nodded knowingly. Organizational change always encounters resistance. How are you addressing these concerns? By focusing on demonstrable results rather than defending my background. When someone questions my qualifications, I show them data. When they resist implementation, I offer pilot programs with clear success metrics. Sarah spent the next 30 minutes detailing her strategies for overcoming resistance while building collaborative relationships. She had learned to lead with questions rather than directives, to credit department heads for improvements they helped implement, and to frame efficiency gains in terms that resonated with different personalities. Most importantly, she concluded, I'm learning that sustainable change happens through partnership, not mandate. My role isn't to impose solutions. It's to facilitate improvements that make everyone's work more satisfying and effective. When she finished, the executives looked pleased. James Morrison spoke first. Sarah, this is exactly the kind of thoughtful, practical leadership we hope to see. You're not just implementing changes. You're building a culture of continuous improvement. Linda Walsh added, the way you're handling resistance shows real emotional intelligence. That's not something you can learn from a textbook. As the meeting concluded, Robert Kim approached Sarah privately. I want you to know that your work is already generating interest beyond Morrison Industries. I've had calls from other CEOs asking about our efficiency initiatives. You're building a reputation in the business community. Walking back to her office, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just 2 weeks. She was no longer invisible, no longer dismissed as worthless. She was building something meaningful, not just for herself, but for the hundreds of employees whose work lives were becoming more efficient and less stressful. But she also realized that her success was creating new pressures and expectations. People were watching to see if the janitor-turned-coordinator could sustain her early wins. Some were hoping for her success, others for her failure. That evening, as she packed up her office for the weekend, Sarah noticed Miguel beginning his security rounds. She waved him over. "How does it feel to be important now?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Scary and exciting," Sarah replied honestly. "But also like this is just the beginning." Miguel nodded approvingly. "That's because you understand something most people don't. Success isn't about arriving somewhere. It's about continuing to grow and serve." As Sarah drove home through the evening traffic, she thought about Miguel's words. She had achieved something remarkable, but she sensed that her greatest challenges and opportunities still lay ahead. The girl from East Los Angeles who had cleaned floors to support her family was now reshaping how a major corporation operated. But more than that, she was proving that worth isn't determined by where you start. It's determined by what you choose to build along the way. 6 months into her role as Operational Efficiency Coordinator, Sarah had transformed from an unknown entity to one of the most talked-about employees at Morrison Industries. The efficiency improvements she had implemented were saving the company nearly $400,000 annually. But more importantly, employee satisfaction surveys showed significant increases in every department where she had worked. However, success brought unexpected challenges. Sarah's rapid rise had created tensions that went far beyond simple workplace politics. She was discovering that disrupting established hierarchies, even for positive reasons, could generate powerful resistance from people who felt threatened by change. The first major crisis came on a Tuesday morning in April. Sarah arrived at her office to find an email marked urgent from James Morrison, asking her to attend an immediate meeting with him and Linda Walsh. The tone was formal and concerning. When Sarah entered James's office, she immediately sensed tension. Linda looked uncomfortable, and James's usually warm demeanor seemed strained. "Sarah, please sit down," James said. "We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What kind of concerns?" Linda pulled out a folder thick with documents. "We've received several formal complaints about your methods and approach. Some employees feel that your background influences are creating unfair advantages for certain departments." "I don't understand," Sarah said carefully. James leaned forward. "Sarah, you've done exceptional work, and your results speak for themselves. But some people are questioning whether you have potential conflicts of interest because of your previous relationships with night shift staff and maintenance personnel." Sarah felt a surge of anger, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Are you suggesting that I'm showing favoritism?" "Not suggesting," Linda clarified, "but several managers have raised concerns that you seem to implement changes more readily in departments where you have existing relationships." Sarah thought about her work over the past 6 months. It was true that she had started with departments where she felt more comfortable: accounting, facilities, human resources. These were areas where she had observed inefficiencies most directly during her custodial years. But she had also achieved measurable improvements in each case. "Can you show me specific examples of this supposed favoritism?" Sarah asked. Linda opened the folder and pulled out several typed pages. "Carl Henderson from marketing has documented instances where you've declined to implement his suggestions while approving similar requests from other departments." Sarah recognized Carl's handwriting on some of the attached notes. She remembered their difficult meetings, his resistance to her proposals, his subtle undermining of her authority in front of other staff. Carl's suggestions weren't declined because of favoritism, Sarah said firmly. They were declined because they weren't supported by data and wouldn't have improved efficiency. "I can show you my analysis of each proposal." "There's more," James said reluctantly. "Some people are questioning whether your online education credentials are sufficient for the decisions you're making. A group of managers has suggested that we should require formal business education for this type of role." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. After 6 months of proven results, they were questioning her qualifications because she didn't have the right diploma. "My results speak for themselves," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her emotions. "In 6 months, I've documented savings of nearly $400,000. Employee satisfaction is up. Productivity is up. Efficiency is measurably improved across multiple departments." "We're not questioning your results," Linda said quickly. "But perception matters in a corporate environment. Some people feel that rapid promotions based on practical experience rather than formal education set a concerning precedent." Sarah understood what was really happening. Her success had threatened people who believed that advancement should follow traditional paths: college degrees, management training programs, years of gradual promotion through established hierarchies. Her rapid rise from janitor to coordinator had disrupted their understanding of how careers were supposed to work. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Sarah asked. James looked uncomfortable. "We'd like you to consider pursuing formal business education to complement your practical experience. We could arrange for the company to pay for an executive MBA program, evening classes that wouldn't interfere with your current role. And if I don't pursue formal education?" The silence stretched uncomfortably long before Linda answered. "Sarah, you're a valued employee, but we have to consider the morale and culture of the entire organization. If people feel that traditional qualifications don't matter, it could create problems." Sarah felt the familiar sensation of being made to feel small, unworthy, not quite good enough. But this time she had data on her side. She had documented evidence of her value. She had transformed how the company operated. "I need some time to think about this," Sarah said. "Of course," James replied. "Take all the time you need. But, Sarah, I want you to know that I personally support you completely. These concerns are being raised by others, not by me." Walking back to her office, Sarah's mind raced with anger and disappointment. She had naively believed that results would be enough, that competence would overcome prejudice about her background. She had underestimated how threatening her success would be to people who had followed conventional paths to their positions. In her office, Sarah closed the door and sat quietly for several minutes. Then, she opened her laptop and began reviewing every project she had completed, every improvement she had implemented, every positive outcome she had generated. The data was overwhelming. Her work had been consistently effective and beneficial to the company. But she also understood the political reality. She was one person fighting against institutional bias and established hierarchies. Even with James Morrison's support, she faced a coordinated effort to undermine her position. That afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Elizabeth Harper knocked on her door with a serious expression. "Sarah, do you have a few minutes? I'd like to discuss something important with you." Dr. Harper closed the door and sat across from Sarah's desk. "I heard about this morning's meeting with James and Linda. I want you to know that not everyone agrees with the concerns that were raised." "Thank you," Sarah said. "But it sounds like enough people agree to make my position difficult." "Here's what I think is really happening," Dr. Harper said. "Your success has exposed how inadequate some of our traditional hiring and promotion practices are. When someone without a college degree outperforms people with MBAs, it makes those people question their own value." Sarah nodded. "So this is really about their insecurity, not my performance." "Partly, yes. But it's also about organizational change. You represent something new, competence, and insight that come from experience rather than credentials. That's threatening to people who've built their careers on traditional qualifications." Dr. Harper leaned forward. "Sarah, I want to make you an offer. I've been asked to develop a new training program on operational efficiency for other companies. Your methods and insights would be the foundation of this program. It would involve consulting work, travel, and significantly higher compensation." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a career opportunity that would value your unique perspectives without requiring you to conform to traditional corporate hierarchies. You could develop your own consulting practice, work with multiple companies, build a reputation based entirely on results." The offer was tempting, but Sarah felt conflicted. Leaving Morrison Industries would feel like admitting defeat, like allowing the people who questioned her qualifications to win. "I need to think about this," Sarah said. "Of course. But, Sarah, don't let institutional bias convince you that the problem is with your qualifications. The problem is with institutions that can't recognize competence when it doesn't come wrapped in familiar packages." That evening, Sarah called her mother for the first time since receiving the promotion. She had been putting off the conversation, uncertain how to explain her complicated feelings about her success. Mija, you sound troubled, her mother said immediately. Sarah found herself explaining the entire situation. The promotion, the success, the resistance, the questions about her qualifications, the offer from Dr. Harper. And what does your heart tell you to do? Her mother asked when Sarah finished. I don't know, Mom. Part of me wants to fight, to prove that I belong where I am. But another part of me is tired of having to justify my worth to people who will never accept that someone like me can be competent. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, do you remember when you were 8 years old and wanted to join the academic decathlon team at school? Yes. The teacher told you that children from our neighborhood usually weren't successful in academic competitions. She suggested you try sports instead. Sarah remembered. She had been devastated, but also determined. But you didn't listen to her, her mother continued. You studied harder than anyone else, and you won second place at the regional competition. I remember. That teacher was wrong about you then, and these people are wrong about you now. The question isn't whether you're qualified, Mija. The question is whether you want to waste your talents fighting people who will never appreciate them, or whether you want to build something new where your gifts can flourish. After hanging up, Sarah walked around her neighborhood, thinking about her mother's words. She passed the high school where she had proven that teacher wrong, the community college where she had taken her first business class, the public library where she had spent countless hours researching and learning. All of her life, she had been fighting to prove she belonged in spaces where she wasn't initially welcome. But maybe the real victory wasn't gaining acceptance from institutions that undervalued her. Maybe it was creating new opportunities that recognized competence regardless of its source. The next morning, Sarah made her decision. She requested a meeting with James Morrison, Linda Walsh, and Dr. Harper. I've thought carefully about our conversation yesterday, she began, and I have a proposal. She outlined a plan that would allow her to continue her efficiency work at Morrison Industries while also developing Dr. Harper's consulting program. She would transition to a part-time role at Morrison, focusing on training internal staff to continue the improvements she had implemented, while building an external practice that could serve multiple companies. This way, Sarah explained, Morrison Industries maintains the benefits of my work while also demonstrating leadership in innovative talent development. Instead of being threatened by non-traditional qualifications, you become known for recognizing competence wherever it emerges. James Morrison's face lit up with understanding. You're suggesting that we make Morrison Industries a case study for progressive talent management. Exactly. Instead of defending against criticism that you promoted an unqualified janitor, you lead the conversation about how companies can identify and develop talent that traditional hiring practices miss. Linda Walsh looked intrigued. This could actually enhance our reputation for innovation. Dr. Harper smiled, and it gives Sarah the platform she deserves while proving that competence and results matter more than credentials. Over the next 2 hours, they worked out the details of Sarah's transition. She would spend 3 days per week at Morrison Industries, training department heads to implement and maintain efficiency improvements. She would spend 2 days per week developing consulting materials and working with Dr. Harper's program clients. Within 6 months, Sarah would launch her own practice, Martinez Operational Solutions, while maintaining a consulting relationship with Morrison Industries. The company would become her first major client and reference, demonstrating their commitment to recognizing talent regardless of its source. As the meeting concluded, James Morrison shook Sarah's hand warmly. Sarah, you've handled this situation with remarkable grace and wisdom. I'm embarrassed that some of our people couldn't see past their own biases, but I'm proud that Morrison Industries will be associated with your future success. Walking back to her office, Sarah felt a mixture of sadness and excitement. She was disappointed that institutional bias had forced her to compromise, but she was also thrilled about the opportunities ahead. That afternoon, she called Miguel to share her news. So you're starting your own business? He asked. It looks that way. Good, Miguel said firmly. Some places aren't ready for people like us, Sarah, but that doesn't mean we're not ready for success. Sometimes you have to build your own place where your talents can shine. As Sarah began planning her transition, she realized that the people who had questioned her qualifications had actually done her a favor. They had forced her to recognize that she had outgrown the limitations others tried to place on her. Instead of fighting for acceptance in spaces that didn't value her, she was creating new spaces where competence and results were the only credentials that mattered. The janitor who had been dismissed as worthless was about to become an entrepreneur, consultant, and advocate for recognizing talent wherever it emerged. Her greatest success wasn't proving she belonged in their world. It was building a world where people like her could thrive without having to prove anything to anyone. 2 years later, Sarah Martinez stood in the lobby of the downtown Marriott Hotel, adjusting her suit jacket and checking her presentation materials one final time. The National Business Leadership Conference had invited her as the keynote speaker for their annual convention, and the irony wasn't lost on her. The same woman who had been dismissed from a corporate training session was now being paid $25,000 to share her insights with business leaders from across the country. Martinez's operational solutions had grown beyond Sarah's wildest dreams. What had started as a consulting practice focused on operational efficiency had evolved into a comprehensive business transformation firm with 12 employees and clients ranging from small nonprofits to Fortune 500 companies. Sarah's unique approach, identifying overlooked talent and unconventional solutions, had revolutionized how organizations thought about efficiency and innovation. But success hadn't erased the memories of being dismissed as worthless. If anything, each achievement felt like a victory not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated because of their background, education, or circumstances. The conference organizer, a polished woman named Janet Stevens, approached with a warm smile. "Ms. Martinez, we're so honored to have you here today. Your story has inspired so many business leaders to reconsider how they identify and develop talent." Sarah smiled back, remembering when such interactions would have intimidated her. Now, confidence came naturally, not arrogance, but the quiet assurance that comes from knowing your worth and having others recognize it. "Thank you, Janet. I'm excited to share what I've learned about finding potential in unexpected places." As Sarah walked toward the conference room, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The transition from Morrison Industries had been challenging, but ultimately liberating. Working part-time had allowed her to develop her consulting skills while maintaining financial stability. Dr. Harper had become not just a mentor, but a business partner, helping Sarah navigate the complex world of corporate consulting. The breakthrough had come when Sarah's work with Morrison Industries caught the attention of a technology startup struggling with operational chaos. The young CEO, Marcus Chun, had heard about Sarah's unconventional background and was intrigued by her results-focused approach. "I don't care if you learn business in a classroom or a janitor's closet," Marcus had told her during their first meeting. "I need someone who can make my company run efficiently, and everything I've heard suggests you can do that." Working with the startup had been different from her corporate experience. The company was hungry for innovation, willing to try new approaches, and grateful for practical solutions. Sarah's efficiency improvements had helped them streamline their operations just in time to secure major venture capital funding. Word spread quickly through the startup community. Soon, Sarah was fielding calls from entrepreneurs who had heard about the consultant with the unusual background who could solve problems that traditional business advisors couldn't even see. Each success built her reputation and confidence. She developed a methodology she called ground-up analysis, studying organizations from the perspective of frontline employees rather than starting with management assumptions. The approach consistently revealed inefficiencies and opportunities that conventional consulting missed. Now, standing before an audience of 800 business leaders, Sarah felt the weight of representing everyone who had ever been counted out because they didn't fit traditional molds. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the large conference room. "My name is Sarah Martinez, and 3 years ago, I was a janitor who wasn't supposed to be smart enough to attend a corporate training session." The audience chuckled, but Sarah's tone was serious. "Today, I want to talk about the difference between credentials and competence, between potential and pedigree, and why the best solutions to your business challenges might come from the people you've never thought to ask." She clicked to her first slide, showing a photo of herself in her custodial uniform alongside a recent photo from a Fortune magazine feature about innovative consultants. "This isn't a rags-to-riches story," Sarah continued. "This is a story about recognition, recognizing talent wherever it exists, recognizing that intelligence and insight don't require impressive diplomas, and recognizing that the people closest to your problems often have the best solutions." For the next hour, Sarah shared case studies from her consulting work, each example illustrating how organizations had transformed by listening to voices they had previously ignored. She talked about the hospital that reduced patient wait times by implementing suggestions from custodial staff who understood traffic patterns better than administrators. She described the manufacturing company that increased safety and productivity by adopting innovations proposed by assembly line workers who had been dismissed as just laborers. But the most powerful moment came when Sarah shared the story of her current project, a collaboration with the Department of Education to identify and develop potential in low-income students who were being overlooked by traditional academic assessments. We've created a program that identifies intellectual potential based on problem-solving ability, pattern recognition, and practical intelligence rather than standardized test scores or family income, Sarah explained. In our pilot program, we found brilliant minds in inner-city schools, rural communities, and immigrant families, students who were being written off by educational systems that couldn't see past their circumstances. Sarah clicked to a slide showing photos and brief profiles of program participants, young people from backgrounds similar to her own who were now thriving in advanced academic programs. Maria Gonzalez was working in her family's restaurant every evening, falling behind in school because she was exhausted from 12-hour days. Traditional assessments labeled her as underachieving. But when we looked at how she managed inventory, coordinated orders, and solved complex logistical problems in that restaurant, we saw exceptional analytical abilities. She's now studying business administration on a full scholarship. The audience was completely silent, absorbed in Sarah's stories. David Kim was labeled as having behavioral problems because he questioned everything his teachers said and refused to accept answers that didn't make sense to him. Instead of seeing defiance, we saw critical thinking. He's now in an accelerated engineering program. Sarah paused, making eye contact with faces throughout the audience. The point isn't that traditional education is worthless or that credentials don't matter. The point is that they're not the only indicators of potential. And when we make them the exclusive gatekeepers of opportunity, we waste tremendous human resources. During the question and answer session that followed, the engagement was intense. CEOs asked about implementing ground-up analysis in their own organizations. HR directors wanted to know about alternative approaches to candidate assessment. Nonprofit leaders inquired about adapting Sarah's methods for community development programs. But the question that affected Sarah most deeply came from a young woman in the back of the room. Ms. Martinez, I'm currently working 2 jobs to support my family while taking community college classes at night. Sometimes I feel like I'll never catch up to people who had traditional advantages. What advice would you give to someone in my situation? Sarah looked at the woman and saw herself from years ago, tired, determined, uncertain, but hopeful. First, Sarah said, understand that your experience is giving you insights and skills that classroom students don't have. You're learning about time management, resource allocation, and problem solving under pressure. Those are valuable competencies, not obstacles to overcome. She paused, remembering her own journey. Second, document what you learn. Keep a journal of problems you solve, innovations you develop, insights you gain from your work experience. Someday, someone will ask you to prove your value, and you'll want evidence of your capabilities. But most importantly, Sarah continued, remember that your worth isn't determined by other people's recognition. You have value whether or not anyone acknowledges it. Your job is to develop your abilities and look for opportunities to demonstrate them. Recognition often follows competence, but it doesn't define it. The woman nodded, tears visible in her eyes, and the audience erupted in spontaneous applause. After her presentation, Sarah was surrounded by people wanting to continue the conversation. Business cards were exchanged, consulting opportunities discussed, and connections made that would lead to future collaborations. As the crowd finally dispersed, Sarah found a quiet moment to check her phone. She had missed calls from Morrison Industries, where she still maintained consulting relationships, and from Dr. Harper, who was now developing a nationwide program based on Sarah's methodologies. But the message that brought tears to her eyes was from Miguel, the night security guard who had encouraged her during those early days. Watched your speech online, his text message read. So proud of how far you've come, but mostly proud that you haven't forgotten where you started. You're changing the world for people like us. That evening, Sarah returned to her hotel room and called her mother. The conversation she had dreaded years ago, telling her family about her success, had become one of her greatest joys. How was your speech, Mija? Her mother asked. Good, Mom. Really good. I think I helped some people today. You've been helping people your whole life, her mother replied. Now you just have a bigger platform. After hanging up, Sarah stood at her hotel window, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere out there were people working night shifts, cleaning offices, stocking shelves, providing services that kept the world running. Many of them had insights, innovations, and solutions that no one was asking to hear. Her phone buzzed with an email from Janet Stevens, the conference organizer. The message contained overwhelmingly positive feedback from attendees and an invitation to deliver similar presentations at conferences throughout the year. But attached to the email was something even more meaningful, a message from a young woman who had asked the question during the Q&A session. Ms. Martinez, the message read, "I wanted you to know that your advice tonight changed my perspective entirely. I've always seen my work experience as something I had to overcome. You helped me realize it's actually my greatest strength. I'm going to start documenting my problem-solving experiences like you suggested. Thank you for showing me that people like us can succeed without apologizing for who we are." Sarah smiled, remembering the training session where she had been made to feel unwelcome, the meetings where her qualifications were questioned, the moments when she had doubted her own worth. All of those experiences had been necessary steps on a journey that led her to this platform where she could advocate for others facing similar challenges. The next morning, as Sarah prepared for her flight home, she received a call that would mark another milestone in her journey. "Ms. Martinez, this is Rebecca Foster from the White House Office of Public Engagement. The president has asked me to reach out to you about a potential opportunity." Sarah almost dropped her phone. "The president?" "Yes. We've been following your work on identifying and developing overlooked talent, particularly in underserved communities. The president is very interested in discussing how your approaches might inform federal policy on workforce development and educational equity." 3 months later, Sarah found herself in the Roosevelt Room of the White House, presenting her ground-up analysis methodology to a bipartisan group of senators, representatives, and policy advisors. The same woman who had once been told she wasn't qualified for a corporate training session was now advising the federal government on how to identify and develop human potential. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came at the end of that White House meeting when the president pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "Ms. Martinez," the president said, "I want you to know that your story represents everything great about America. The idea that a janitor can become a consultant advising the president isn't just inspiring, it's essential to our democracy and our economy." Sarah felt the weight of representing not just herself, but everyone who had ever been underestimated because of their background or circumstances. "Thank you, Mr. President. But I hope my story becomes so common that it stops being remarkable. There are brilliant people everywhere, in every job, at every level. We just need to learn how to see them." The president smiled. "That's exactly why you're here. Help us build systems that find those people and give them opportunities to contribute." As Sarah flew home from Washington, she reflected on the incredible journey from invisible janitor to White House advisor. But she also thought about all the people still waiting for their moment of recognition, still working in positions that didn't reflect their potential, still wondering if anyone would ever see their worth. Her mission was no longer just about her own success. It was about proving that talent and intelligence existed everywhere, waiting to be discovered and developed. It was about changing how society identified and nurtured potential. It was about ensuring that no one would ever again be dismissed as worthless simply because they didn't fit traditional expectations. The janitor's daughter from East Los Angeles had become a voice for the voiceless, an advocate for the overlooked, and living proof that worth is determined not by where you start, but by what you choose to build with the opportunities you create for yourself and others. As her plane descended toward home, Sarah opened her laptop and began writing her next proposal, a nationwide initiative to identify and develop overlooked talent in every community across America. The girl who had once cleaned offices while dreaming of being heard was now shaping national policy and inspiring a generation of leaders to recognize potential wherever it emerged. The transformation was complete, but the mission was just beginning.